few minutes that we took to wait for more people to join us. We prepared this webinar with a lot of enthusiasm, like for you, for our community. Our goal is not only to offer you the best coffees with traceability, stories behind it, but also learn and grow together in our knowledge of the industry, of course. Today, we have Luke Agnes from Café Orígenes from Peru. We have the opportunity of being working with them for a couple of years now. So we think this is a perfect time to start talking about this wonderful origin that is so unfamiliar for many people. So this is the perfect time. Welcome to this session and thank you for being in here, for being part of this event. We invite you to share your question in the chat throughout the presentation. Clara Lua is here as well. We are part of the Ally Coffee as the marketing team. So we're organize the questions and at the end we're gonna have questions and answer, of course. So welcome once again. We hope you enjoy this space. Luke, you have the device.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Luke. I am the general manager of the Cooperativa Agraria Orígenes del Valle del Laco, or Café Orígenes. We're a pretty small indigenous farmer co-op, 65 families based out of Cusco, Peru, founded in 2022. I've been living in Peru now for 8 years, but I'm not Peruvian, and I don't know if you can tell by my accent. I'm actually from California originally. During the Q&A portion of this, we'll be joined by a number of my colleagues who some speak English, some don't. So if you have any questions specifically towards their experience, we can translate those and then translate answers back into English. I specifically want to highlight Mishaki Paravecino Kewarucho, who is going to be joining us for that portion of the presentation. She is our Director of Social Initiatives. She's a third generation or fourth generation farmer from the community of Huiwai, where we work. And for those of you who don't know Peru very well, Cusco is one of the more southern states and is a pretty major player within Peru, but definitely not the most productive. It's got a really storied history. We're going to get into a little bit of all of that. I want to give a macro view of Peru as a whole and then focus in on a couple of key things, specifically what we do, especially with relation to traceability and some of the impact side of things. I just want to start by, saying I think Peru is kind of having a moment. I think there's a lot more people interested, especially in some of the like really high-end stuff that's coming out of Peru these days, but it's not necessarily known for that. I think, when a lot of buyers, especially people who have been in the industry for a long time, think about Peru, they think about big fair trade organic Peru, right? Like that's kind of what it's known for. And so I want to talk about why maybe that is and then where things are kind of heading. So let's see. Are my slides advancing? I just want to make sure we're all on the same page here. I've got about 10 hours of content in my head, and we're going to try and do this in a relatively short time. So if there is like an immediate question or like a clarification that I can do, just throw a hand up in the tool, the Teams thing here, and we'll get to it as soon as there's a good chance to break. So yeah, we're going to go through a little bit over an overview of Peru and then what we do and what we do well. Just want to say thanks to Ally for giving us this platform to be able to go through this. So I think most people would know at this point that Latin America did not produce coffee well through the 16th century into the 17th century. And so coffee gets introduced, of course, by the Spanish, mostly colonists in general. It's brought over from Europe in the mid 1600s or so, or mid 1700s, excuse me. And for a long time, it's just local consumption. It's what is produced on these haciendas. Peru is uniquely suited to the climate, having the eastern slope of the Andes, which is right next to the Amazon. So it's these subtropical climates and its altitude and a bunch of other things that make coffee particularly easy to grow. Then this really interesting thing happens, and I want to spend a
Luke,
little bit of time on it. Um,
your slides are not
not
progressing, just so you
advancing.
know.
All
No.
right. How do I? My bad. I'm gonna unpresent and represent. My bad. All right. Is that better?
Yes. Thank you.
Sweet. Thank you for the heads up. So in the 1960s, this thing happens that reshapes, well, Peru as a whole, but if we want to relate it to specifically to coffee, in the 1960s, the Peruvian agrarian revolution happens. And I think this is kind of the core and why you see Peruvian coffee the way it is today, which is to say, extremely co-op heavy, right? And a lot of big organizations moving lots of weight in community in Peruvian coffee. So in the 1960s, right in La Convención Cusco, this movement starts of basically landless farm workers working for the descendants of Spaniards on haciendas. They get pretty tired of that system with very good reason, and they start to take back land that when the Spanish showed up, it was the Inca Empire, right, with the seat of power in Cusco, but that empire spanned from all the way from Colombia and Ecuador down through Peru, Bolivia, Chile, Argentina. And so the especially the campesino people of Cusco start this revolution and then it expands to the whole country. And when it gets codified into law, about 9 million hectares of land get redistributed back to like three main groups, right? Campesino communities as a whole, so just groups of people living in a place. One, two, cooperatives, right, which is where coffee comes into play, and then three, another social group that is now no longer relevant in the context of Peru. So with these 9 million hectares, farmers are starting to decide what they want to cultivate at the same time, right? We're entering almost the second wave of coffee, and sugarcane especially is no longer the crop it once was. It's also really associated with like the hacienda owners, and so people are thinking, you know what, like maybe coffee's the thing to do. Peru is uniquely suited again to it with the eastern slope of the Andes, and this being a huge potential um, for this product, this and cacao. A lot of people shift into to coffee if they weren't already producing when coffee really starts moving from the north farther to the south in the 1860s. So I mentioned that because I think it's really important to talk about like how the impact that this movement has on coffee today or on Peruvian coffee today, because by the 1990s, early 2000s, coffee scales, right? We're getting closer to this idea of the third wave. We're talking about, you know, a huge opportunity for pretty major exports. I think Peru is now top 10 in the world, seventh, if I'm not mistaken. It is number two in the production of organic coffee at about 35% of its exports. And it's generally speaking pretty good, right? Like the coffee itself from all over Cusco or from all over Peru is tends to be high elevation. Having access to such a mountainous region such as the Andes means really high elevation. It's unique soil types and from the northern part of Peru all the way down to the southern, there is a massive diversity of of um, like microclimates, right? And so if we're looking at this is the production map of Peru, um, something that jumps out immediately is that you know San Martin. I think this graph is from like 2022, but San Martin is doing about 1.5 million exportable sacks of coffee, and then it drops off to 1.2 in Junín, and then Cajamarca at about 1 million. And the region that I work most in is Cusco, which is sitting in at number 5. But the whole, you can see the entirety of the country of Peru produces coffee, right? Or I'm sorry, the northern part to the southern part. So it really kind of, when I got into this industry and when we founded this co-op, I was looking on importers' websites and roasters' websites, and I'm thinking, how are people presenting Peruvian coffee? And I got a whole lot of FTO Peru, organic Peru, Peru, and I'm just thinking, what Peru, which Peru, who are we talking about here? Because within each of these regions are just a diversity of people and cultures, right? And I think that's one of the things with the industry in general, and actually with the way that Peru was managing its own coffee, that was missing was like, this is not just a crop, it's not just a cup score, it's like a ton of people and cultures and languages and differences producing this product. And I think each one of these regions within them, I mean, within the 7 or so campesino communities in which we work, each one of them has their unique kind of things to say, and their unique microclimates and their unique culture and food and textiles and all of that stuff. And so now I think most people who have bought from coffee from Peru would know that, roughly, or the backbone of Peruvian coffee really is Typica, the variety. It is genetically adapted to and now unique to Peru. At some point, especially in the early 2000s, it was about 70% of Peruvian coffee was Typica with the coffee leaf rust. It was susceptible in a big way, and people started shifting away. Captura, especially in the north, got really popular. And then in the south, maybe a little bit more Catimor. Certainly Bourbon is kind of rounding out the top 3 or 4. And then now we're getting into a lot more varietals. But I think what makes Peru unique in general is its cultural and agricultural diversity. So this image here is like this Inca science lab, essentially, where they were literally experimenting on all of these terraces all the way down, different crops and what crops grew well at just incremental increases in elevation. Now, if you expand that to the Andes, it's not hard to imagine that coffee varietals are going to thrive at various different kind of microclimates and altitudes, right? And so if Peru has from 0 meters elevation in the Amazon all the way up to the 6,000 plus meter peaks, right? Coffee's going to find its place in there. And Typico is what took over, but now we're starting to see like a shift towards newer varietals. I think Peru might be limited by the fact that without a centralized authority, a coffee authority, there isn't quite as much distribution of research and innovation, especially in varietals, which is a problem. But what it does have is across Peru, you can really notice it if you cup coffees from, let's say, the north, central, and south, just to group the 3 main groups. In the south, this is a little maybe too in the weeds, but I think it's important to note. The south especially is characterized by like soil types that are based on a geological history of like volcanic activity, called them Andes soils. In the central part of the country, soil is a little bit shallower, but really great for certain native tree varieties. So shade-grown coffee in general does very well. And those would be called Nasepti soils. And then in the northern part of the country, when you get closer to the border with Ecuador, Colombia, Brazil, now we're talking about ultisols, which are more tropical soil types, right? And so, it's a term that I think coffee's taken from wine, this word terroir, but like it makes a lot of sense why the coffees would shift so drastically north to south. And I think it's also really important to note that Peru is a massive producer of shade-grown coffee. And one of the reasons that it's able to do that so well is because there is a diversity of shade varieties that are really conducive to producing coffee. And I've seen in other areas of the world in general that people are trying to bring shade back and trying out different tree varietals. I think Peru has exactly what it needs, essentially, to keep this high quality, on average, let's call it, of coffee going. So that being said, uh, Peru's facing some pretty significant challenges. And I really struggled trying to decide how to present this because I think Peru's potential is that of it is the equal of any coffee growing country in the world. It really has the potential to be just one of the most unique, diverse, like good coffee origins, and it is frequently. But like I said, there's no central coffee authority, and I know places like Colombia, which have the FNC, are they a centralized authority has its own problems, right? But that what happens in Peru is that there's a minimum of 5 organizations that I can think of off of the top of my head that are trying to group coffee farmers, and they're all competing for the same funds. And they're all competing to show innovation. And anybody who's worked in Latin America for a while might know that corruption starts to creep in, especially in heavy competition. And so I think I'm starting to see a lot more new varietals coming out of the north of Peru that slowly make their way south. But I think that has a lot to do with its proximity to Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador, like places that have greater levels of research and investment into some of those varietals. That being said, because Peru is so co-op heavy after the agrarian revolution, the contract sizes that got built out in the 80s and 90s became essentially huge. What happened, for instance, with arguably for a long time it was Peru's biggest and best co-op was Cocla out of Cusco. They're still around, but it's changed a little bit, and they're a co-op. They're a decentralized co-op, so they're a co-op made up of co-ops. Now they were producing massive amounts of coffee, buying from the whole country, and then oversold. Right, super common problem with co-ops in general is overcommitting to the coffee that you frankly don't have, right? And that makes traceability super hard because you're committed, you're in debt, you're making decisions that, while not excellent, are necessary maybe to keep your co-op alive and to make sure that you don't default on loans. When Peru defaulted on its loan in the early 2000s, England got 2 million hectares of land that it pushed actually towards growing coffee, weirdly enough. And that being said, because the microclimates are so different throughout Peru, a good year in the north does not mean a good year in the south. And so maybe a co-op in the south was expecting a bumper crop, didn't get it, and had to go to the north. It just leads to this lack of transparency and this lack of traceability that I think is fairly common of those really big lots that come out of Peru. Also, this can't be news as well, but the volatility in coffee right now is making things really difficult. We're a tiny co-op, 65 farmers. We're relatively new. Our credit history is short. The volatility and the inherent risk in the industry is making financing for us very, very difficult. And it's making financing for most coffee producers very, very difficult. Domestic lenders within Peru are predatory frequently at best. And so, we got quoted for a loan. I think I was at 70% interest rate, which we'll get to later, well outpaces our profit margin. And so it's infeasible occasionally. And then finally, I mean, Peru has some really remote, really hard to access regions. We are in one of those regions. We're in a place called the Laco Valley, which until this year had very little road access, right? So we bring all of our coffee out on mules, as is depicted here. But the infrastructure investment to get coffee out, now that coffee is Peru's biggest agricultural export, it's not there. It's not matching the level of demand that there is in the country. And so what roads there are generally speaking bad, sketchy, landslides and poorly built, poorly designed roads. And then that makes something like a super centralized, for instance, washing station that you'll see in other places very difficult. Now, there's a couple of co-ops, especially I think the North is doing a good job of trying to find ways to make coffee more efficient. But for instance, we process all of our coffee at bigger plants in Lima because Cusco, until very recently, this year, in fact, had nothing that quite met our standards for processing. And so, now you're shipping parchment out, which is expensive per kilo. It's inefficient. You have to return a bunch of the product. It's just difficult, to say the least. So, who are we? Orígenes. This video is maybe a little corny occasionally, but I think one of the things that we're trying to do differently is that we're trying to be really specific about about who we are, where we come from, the the pride inherent in being from a remote area and being so good at producing coffee. This is a region that is, I think, poorly recognized globally, but is definitely having I think some of the best coffees in the country are coming out of this valley specifically. We're on the backside of a place called Manu National Park, which, according to National Geographic, is the most biodiverse place in the world. And so we're, out there walking, harvesting the coffee by hand. It's still a Quechua indigenous culture that descends from the Incas that still has things in place like Aini, which is a communal system of labor where essentially I harvest your coffee today, we harvest mine tomorrow, and we do that through the list of neighbors. And another thing called Faina, which I think is really important, which is the community comes together once, 4 times a year, let's call it, on a community good. Something like an irrigation project or cleaning up the community or building out the trails or maintenance and things like that. And so this is just a little short visual intro to who we are. So, it's you can see visually in the video that this is an intense valley. I mean, it's vertical, and I think the farmers that we work with are truly excellent and expert in adapting to the region in which they live, and also into conserving and doing really, really well with producing in agroforestry systems, especially my colleague guy actually who's narrating that video is a regenerative agriculture expert, and so I feel like we are not the only ones doing this. Peru is having because its giant focus on big lots and big cooperatives was so intense. I think cooperatives are starting to see the value in doing a lot more with the people with which they work. There is frankly, to put it simply, money in doing more. And so our team specifically is made up of many more people than this, but I want to highlight just a couple of really key players on our team. Juan Casa, who's our QC and community relationships manager. So he's Quechua speaking. He's from the region. He is, he's an agricultural expert who just saw a need within the co-op that we didn't know how to do quality control in our first year, and just went out and learned it and has become just essential. And then Julio Nina, he's our director of agriculture. He's doing all of the regenerative agriculture. He's doing soil health and shade health and pest and disease management, which is especially prevalent in organic production. As I'm sure many know, coffee leaf rust is still a huge problem. Co-op president is also the youngest member of the co-op, Rene Quispe. He has a vision for young people in coffee, and it's really exciting to work with him because I think everybody knows that coffee population or coffee growing populations are aging out of production a little bit. Young people don't particularly want to do the job, and he is the antithesis to all of that. He sees that, he thinks, he believes, and he knows that coffee can be productive and profitable for the farmer, and he's doing it all from the farm level. And then finally, Mishaki, who's on the call today, and she works especially with our women's group, which has been a huge kind of boost to the co-op. I think we've gotten, I think working in gender equity in general has intangible effects on the health of the cooperative, on the health of coffee in general, and I think we'll see that economically as well. This, is less important, but this is the general structure of a co-op. So I've spoken at length at this point about co-ops in general, but ours is structured like this. Bigger ones will be structured much more in a much more complex fashion. But basically, the reason for me that the co-op still needs to be an essential part of coffee is because the General Assembly of Farmers is the absolute authority. So if the co-op is functioning well, its members are involved and voting on how to push the co-op forward. And so it's driven by the actual farmer. And that, doesn't work always. Co-ops are notorious occasionally for corruption scandals and all sorts of things, but in its structure, it shouldn't be that way. So the General Assembly elects our 12-member farmer executive board, who then hire me as the general manager, and then I distribute all things commercialization, and then manage all of the production, social, and transformation side of things. This is something I want to see a lot more of, and something that we're trying to promote to more co-ops. So I originally studied data science. I'm a data guy, I guess. And when we started working in coffee and I started seeing all of these big generic Peruvian lots, it just seemed like such an impersonal and unrealistic way to view a product that is so dependent on thousands and thousands and thousands of farmers producing it. So when we got started, we wanted to figure out how we could measure essentially the effect of soil of projects related to soil health and irrigation over time, and that grew and grew and grew until my colleague Santiago, who's also on this call, if you have any questions about this tool, built out on our website this traceability tool where you can filter, for instance, you as a buyer or you as an interested party can click on any number of these farmers and figure out what they're producing, what their elevation is, what varietals, what process, cup score, any of it. And then you can also filter by, let's say you want a Bourbon, a washed Bourbon at 2,000 meters from a specific community. And the reason I say a specific community is because we don't do generically named lots. If a farmer doesn't have the quality or volume threshold to meet a micro lot, we group them into the name of their community. And naming farms around this particular area of Cusco is not common. And so, instead of naming it Finca, Esperanza or whatever, we're naming all of our lots by the farmer themselves because we think that level of transparency, traceability, recognition is core to this. Our farmers are roughly 1.5 hectares, 2 hectares is average production. 4 is massive for us. I think there's one guy doing 4 hectares. So, but this is common. This is indicative of Peru. There are areas, especially where there's been more investment, where plot sizes are much bigger, and where even co-ops might manage the farms themselves with workers. But this is a humongous part of Peru. I'd say 75% of Peru is farmers at this scale, right? And I think not being able to recognize them and not knowing that they're contributing to the lot that you're buying is not ideal. Let's call it that way. So we built this tool to do that. Now, I've spoken at length at this point that coffee is a product driven by people. If you're not investing in people, you're not investing in the future of coffee. We can do, I certainly wish Peru had a better resource for investigating more resistant varietals and things like that. But I also think it's missing the investment on the human side of things. Like if there's difficulties in access, if there's difficulties in healthcare, if there's difficulties in road infrastructure and things like that, these are the places that we want to see money spent. And so this is something that we focus on a lot. And I think I'm actually seeing in a lot of other places. I think there's a number of people in Peru doing really good work on all of this. I just want to shout out really quickly. Chakra de Dago is very impressive, especially on the environmental side of things. Inkawasi, great co-op out of Cusco. I have no influence over their sales or anything like that. So these are just, kind of off the cuff people I think that are doing similar things and great things. But yeah, these are some of the producers we work with. I've mentioned transparency as being a core value. I don't know if a lot of roasters get an insight into what a co-op gets out of an FOB price. So I wanted to bring that up just a little bit. Let's call an average container 250 odd exportable sacks of 69 kilo green coffee. This is our data. This is not necessarily indicative of other co-ops. Well, it is to a certain extent, but the point is that the vast majority of any co-op's expenses go directly to its farmers, right? If a container is worth $100,000, $78,000 go directly into farmer pockets, and that's pretty true of most co-ops, right? And then moving trucks and bags and all of that around is a relatively small percentage. We are subsidized heavily, and this is a problem. So we're subsidized heavily by a nonprofit, and our admin and financing costs are still at 12%, even with a bunch of things being covered by a nonprofit. Now, it's one of the reasons that co-ops scale so quickly. We have more demand than we know what to do with. People want the coffee. That's not the problem. We can't figure out, well, sorry, that's not true. We are figuring out how we can scale sustainably, where we can maintain the focus on people and adapt our approaches to their specific needs and to their specific desires, without while scaling without sacrificing that core value. And so this 7.8% in net profit that we had in 2024, what little could be invested in something like the cupping lab, which was necessary, we invested in the cupping lab. We had to hold out a certain amount of money because the farmers that we work with, coffee doesn't sustain a year's worth of living. One harvest per year. And in Peru, it's loosely speaking, depending on altitude and region of the country, between April and October. That one-time income for Peru, at least for our farmers, does not cover a year's worth of living. So we forward pay a lot of coffee, which is a dangerous game. But when you have the level of trust and connection and transparency that we have, it ends up working out. for the most part. So finally, just to wrap things up a little bit, you know, I think we're particularly impactful as an organization, and I don't mean that to come off kind of just toot my own horn because I know we're not the only ones doing it. But I think when we approach coffee and when we approach coffee just talking about cup scores and certifications and lot size and all of that, we're missing the rest of this. In order for coffee to have a future, and coffee is certainly in a questionable spot with climate change, with young people who don't want to produce coffee, we have to view it from a holistic view, right? Like we have to consider everything from soil health to human health to the impact to the self-confidence to the work that we can do with humans to make this coffee thing in a viable option for people to make a living from through the future. And so we do that through focusing on three primary areas, being environmental work, so specifically irrigation, conservation, reforestation, and then social impact. We focus a lot on gender equity, trying to grow a youth movement, and then health being a major problem for most farmers. We're trying to bring more access to healthcare. And then finally, economic impact. Our coffee is undoubtedly more expensive than our competitors. I don't think it's unreasonably more expensive, but it is more expensive. You can find, you know, bigger lots for cheaper, without a doubt. But I don't think that any of them will have the economic impact that we're able to achieve working this closely with farmers. With that, I just want to shout out Ally one more time. We're bringing some coffee into the US this year. And hoping for Europe, for any of our European friends out there, I think our traceability would make it quite simple to get through the EUDR process. We're looking at Europe for next year. This year, we've got 3 primary lots: Huiwai, where Mishaki's from, Umapata, co-op presidents from there, and the women's group Anaerobic Washed. The women's group is specifically getting a lot of post-harvest support, and so this is a lot that we're really excited about to like start highlighting the work that they're doing and the impact that they're having on our co-op. I think with that, we can open things up for questions. Thank you all for your time. If I can return to a slide or anything, just let me know.
Gabby, would you like to share about our partnership or something to our?
Sure. So this will be our second time bringing in Luke's Coffee and Café Orígenes to the United States. We are landing this coffee on the West Coast. As Luke mentioned, we are still looking at moving some of the coffee from Peru to other areas, but we've been really loving working with this group. It's been a great connection to have, and it's been great working with, I think, these coffees. They taste great. We have some samples available. We are expecting spot coffee in the United States to be available towards the end of this year, beginning of next year. And it's a little early for me, so I'm blanking on what else to share right now. But open to questions, so happy to talk about this, happy to talk about how we can start connecting roasters to this group, to these coffees, to these samples, and get those conversations going. Shayna. Is that how you say that?
You have your mic.
There we go. Sorry, I don't know why I come out Shayna, but yeah, this is Manuel from Snowy Owl Coffee Roasters. Congratulations to both. We work currently with Ala in different coffees. Look, great job there with Orígenes. I'm originally from Peru. We are located in Cape Cod, Massachusetts. We have our three big coffee from Peru that we use year round. So this is very interesting to learn about you guys jumping on this partnership. And yeah, as a Peruvian, yeah, we see the challenges in my country, but the potential is incredible. So great job. The transparency and the traceability is super important for us as we want to specialize in Peruvian coffee every time. So you said originally first you're going to start with the West Coast first. We are located obviously in the East Coast. So that's going to be the start point, and then see how we can get to this side.
Yeah, and there's a small chance still that we could move some coffee to the East Coast this year. That's not off the table yet. I just know for sure coffee's going to the West Coast at this point. But in discussions, I suppose, still about moving a couple hundred sacks to the East Coast. I think we'd like to be represented everywhere. So I just my personal contacts are a little bit more West Coast.
Nice.
And we can speak to that this year really quick. Sorry. Ally committed to as much coffee as we could, and then have been working on where to put that coffee. So we committed early to make sure that the co-op knew that there was a buyer, that this coffee was moving. And now we are in the discussions of where to. So that's why when Luke says it could maybe go to the East Coast, it could maybe go to the East Coast, it could maybe go to another country. We are still figuring that part out.
No, that's good and makes sense. And now on the, you're saying like the obviously the quality of the coffee is high, and sometimes it's hard to talk about the scores. But where you guys, because we have single origins like our high scores as well, but also we use for example our espressos are blend components. Is any opportunity for future for blend components as well, where we can represent farmers who are not represented on that niche?
Yeah, I mean, quality is relative, but yeah. So our kind of blenders, we try and make sure hit 84 across the board, and so that's where we try and land. Specifically, these are, especially being from Cusco, chocolatey, like citrusy. If you're depending on the lot a little bit, maybe some like dried fruit and things like that. I actually, with the density and the altitude, our floor is 1,650 meters, and our ceiling, there is no ceiling. I mean, we can go all the way up to 3,000 odd, but climate doesn't allow us to do that. So we're up at about 2,200, 2,300 pretty comfortably. We have some farmers working on 2,400 meter coffees. But yeah, 84 is about where we start. We really, frankly, don't have many coffees that have gotten too much higher above 86. But we had our first lot this year, cup in the 88s, which was pretty remarkable. That was a geisha. Again, I think we had 30 kilos of it or something. So, but that one's supposed to come online for next year. But yeah, we have an espresso, or we have a brand here in Cusco that we sell to like local high-end hotels and cafes and things like that. And we roast it for espresso, and pretty well received, if that's of interest.
Thank you.
I did want to say, I guess, one more thing specifically about what the partnership with Ally means for us. So, roasters have their pick of all the buyers, and we've had interest from many. Ally committing early for a small co-op, for a really small co-op and a young co-op, committing early to coffees meant that we could finance them, and we could finance them at not bad interest rates, like people trusted us because we had a contract on the books. It's made a pretty massive difference in how we do business, and that was not available through other people we've worked with. So just a bit of a shout out to the way Ally's doing business, and the it's a risk working with young and new farmer groups. That being said, I think that many who buy Peruvian coffee have tried coffee from Cusco if they're not directly buying from it, because coffee really moves all over the country. It's one of the lack of traceability things that happens, but there's probably a coffee you like that's got a good bit of Cusco in it.
So no more questions, I guess. Thank you everyone for joining us. We want to keep exploring these spaces with a lot of different partnerships we have right now. Thank you, Luke, especially knowing that you are in Australia right now. Go to sleep. It's like 2 a.m. in there. Thank you, Gabby, as well. Thank you, Clara. Thank you everyone for joining us. We'll invite you soon to another space like this. Thank you. Oh, Philip, you have a question or something?
So I wanted to do a heart, but then the hand goes.
Amazing.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Have a good one.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.